Hi, welcome to my drawing workshop. My name is Ryan Pola and I'm going to be covering some tips and tricks, some how do you do that questions for the Unwrapped festival with the Greater City of Dandenong and the Walker Street Gallery. Let's get started. So with this piece of paper, I'm going to be covering features of the face and how I approach them. So first up I have the eye, and I've drawn an example where the full iris is visible. I don't like to do this. Instead, I like to hide parts of the top and the bottom of the iris behind the lines of the lid to make it look a bit realistic. I bring in some quick lines for the eyelashes, some soft lines under the eye, and this is where I can start adding shadows. And then I add the crease of the eye just above, and I make that a bit darker so I can bring in my shading. Now we have the nose, and in my incorrect example, I've drawn the nose quite bulbous with the nostrils as a full circle and harsh lines for the bridge of the nose. This is not great. Instead, what I like to do is like this extended W shape with the nostrils curved in from the sides, and then soft lines on the outside of the nose, and a darker line for the kind of the upper part of the lip where the cupid's bow is, and then just soft lines to show where the highlights are just with basic shapes. Next up we have the lips or the mouth, and a lot of times when I see people drawing this part of the face, there's harsh lines defining every part of it. Instead, how I approach it is to use a solid line in the middle with flicks curving up or down depending on the expression, a soft line on the top and bottom of the lip, and then I add some quick sketchy lines just to show the shape and the creases within the skin of the lips. And last up we have the ears. In this first example, I've used quite a round C shape and then just brought in basic lines and curvatures for the different parts of the ear. I used to hate drawing ears, but now they're one of my favorite parts to draw in a picture. And how I approach them is by first bringing in the jaw and the neck lines and then building up from there, using the hair to hide the top parts of the ear if hair's blocking out parts of the ear, just as a reference to know that I don't have to draw and shade every part of the ear. I've just defined the outside and I'm working outside in, and I'm bringing in the helix, the top of the ear, now the tragus, the lobe, upper part of the lobe, and the rook. You can see that I've referred to my reference image a lot to make sure I've got all the different shapes. Ears are a lot more angular than just perfect curves. And one thing you'll see me doing here is erasing my line work and then working back into it so it gets rid of all those sketchy little lines and I'm only using the lines that I need. Okay, let's talk paper. With a ruler pressed firmly, I tear away any excess from the ruled up area that I'm going to be drawing within, and then I use this leftover paper as kind of like a hand stopper on the surface of my drawing paper. This just stops me from blurring any parts of the drawing and creating smudges on the work as I'm going. Before I move on to the main part of this video where I complete a whole drawing in time lapse for you, I'm going to do a quick line work of a face that I'm going to be using for another piece in the show, just to show how I place everything in proportion with each other. When I begin a drawing, I don't really use any conventional drawing method for drawing a face, say like grid lines or reference lines. Instead, what I like to do is look at my reference picture and find the part that I'm most visually interested in. By doing this, I ensure that I'm vested in the drawing, and I want to get it right the first time if I'm starting with a place that looks exciting to draw. And by doing this, I can also build off other features of the face with where I've begun, and then start working in proportions and scale and just making sure everything, which you can see me doing here by bringing down the nose from the eye, just making sure that everything's in proportion and referenced from that original eye that I drew by continually looking at the nose on the reference picture and then back at my page as I'm drawing my lines. I will just mention that I know I did say earlier in this video that I don't like to use crisp hard lines for the side of my nose on the bridge, but on my reference picture the face is tilted slightly to the side, so I'm going to bring in that part of the nose now just so that I know where that harsh line is and I can shade from there. At the bottom of the drawing I've brought in the lips, and you can see I've used the same method as I referenced earlier in my little tutorial part for lips. And here I'm just pointing out how I've shown that the iris is hidden behind the top and the bottom lid a little bit, and just shown how I start eyebrows by using cross-directional lines, so lines that move towards the outer part of the face going upwards and lines that move towards the outer part of the face by going downwards. This allows me to make sure that eyebrows look more realistic instead of just going upwards. Underneath the eye, I've brought in just some light sketchy lines, and I'm going to build in kind of the bag part of the eye with some shading. And with the extended W for drawing the nostrils and the tip of the nose, I've just broken it apart on that left side just to show that the nose is tilted a little bit to the right, facing us, I think. With the lips, I've left off the harsh lines and I've only done my middle line, my top and my bottom line. I've darkened the corner of the mouth and the tip of the lip because they will be the darkest parts in my drawing. And I've left the left and right sides of the lip unlined so that I can show that in the drawing that the lips fade out. There's no real crisp line unless there's a lot of contrast or exposure, but I can just show that the lips are soft and they build out from that middle line to the rest of the face. Quickly, I'd just like to touch on drawing in the lines or the outside shape of the face. I avoid doing this to the last possible minute, as this allows me to make sure that the features of my face that I'm drawing are correctly in proportion with each other before I draw this face shape that kind of creates this predetermined field that I have to draw the features within. And here I'm just showing an example of what like face grid lines look like. I don't use these when putting everything in reference with each other, like I said before, but instead I'll just place the eye in reference with the top of the nose, make sure that the corner of the lip matches up with the pupil, things like that, looking at common things that you can find in every face that you're drawing just to make sure everything works together. Rule of thumb, there's a few things that you can do by like placing the nostrils in line with the bottom of the earlobe, making sure the top of the ear doesn't really extend beyond the eye, making sure that the width of the nose is kind of in line with the width of the eyes, giving the space of a third eye between your left and your right eye, and then just making sure that your eyebrows aren't just this solid shape above the eye, but then building them into more sparse kind of spread out hairs. I make sure when drawing the face that I place the shape of the neck on it early, as this allows me to give the drawing a bit of context and it's not just a face floating in shape. Rule of thumb with drawing necks is that they'll generally come down from the ears, not from a place further in along the jawline. With that sharp line that I had quickly there on that last tutorial before I begin this, I avoid doing sharp lines on the cheek. I'd like to build the cheekbones in if they are visible within the reference through shading. Alright, I've had a quick breath after explaining how I approach the features of the face with giving line work to them, and now I'm going to talk to how I approach shading and rendering when I'm building up the form and textures of my drawings, working off my reference picture at all times. I'll try and get through explaining how I shade fairly quickly because I think watching how I do it is a better way of understanding how I approach it, but I will talk quickly to a few things. I know before I mentioned that I use like a piece of scrap paper under my hand. I'm not using it here, and that's very naughty of me, but it's very early in the drawing, so I don't have to worry too much about smudging with the side of my hand. So I'm building up slowly with using different ranges of pencil. I'll work with everything between an 8B to an 8H, and I'll just continually layer and layer and layer to get it nice and smooth. And then to make it that extra smooth, I'll get a firm little brush that you'll see me bring in at different parts of this drawing, and I'll brush them into the teeth of the paper. And by paper tooth, I'm referring to how smooth or rough it is. Paper comes in different weights, especially drawing paper, and when drawing big portraits like this life-size one, I like to use a watercolor paper that's a little bit more rough, so it has a little bit more of a bite to it, and this just allows me to build up the different rendering techniques that I'm using or different shading methods that I'm utilizing within the drawing without worrying too much about making a mistake on a smooth piece of paper. I wish I used smooth paper more, but I'm very apprehensive and I don't know it that well as much as I know a watercolor paper like the one I'm using here. I am definitely trying to use different types of paper to enhance my skill and learn different things, and it's great, but I always love coming home to a 300 GSM paper. Alright, enough about paper. Let's get back to how I approach shading a drawing. As I'm a creature of habit, you can see that I started from the eyes and I've worked down the face with the features moving from the eye to the nose to the mouth. This face is also angled away, but it's a little bit more angled than the reference picture I was using before for the line work. But here I'm just building up different parts of the face. You can see I've used that crisp line in the middle of the lips and then just built out my shading from there to show the different forms and shape of the lip, keeping it nice and soft to build out from the lip where it turns from lip to face skin, just above where that beard is. And then I'm just bringing in parts of the chin and the jaw, just starting them with loose rendering first and then building it up. I didn't worry too much about getting it smooth under the like where the jaw is, because I knew that I was going to be drawing the rest of the beard in, so that wasn't too important at this stage. And here now I'm just building up the ear, working with all the different shapes that I can see with it. I know I said before I love drawing ears, and I still love drawing ears because there's just so much nuance to them, and you kind of can be a bit more flexible and not worry too much about getting it perfect, because they are often very obscured by other parts of the face, like the hair or how far away, what direction the face is turning, so they do get hidden. But I love drawing them. They're great fun. Here I'm just building in the side of the temple and the cheekbones, and just putting in sideburns and some more of the beard before I keep shading. When I'm approaching the hair, I like to make sure that I work from the face out, if that makes sense. So I draw the hair that is coming onto the face, if it is, and this just gives me a little bit more play with how I'm going to approach the shading for the face as I continually build up the tones and the forms. It also allows me to kind of know how far out I need to push shadows or how close in I need to bring shadows, just making sure I get the shapes of the face correctly the first time, instead of having to go back continually and adjust and then erase and redraw and erase and redraw. In a second you'll see me start bringing in the shading of the hand and just start building up the form and the textures of it. The best advice that I can give with drawing hands and feet is to continually practice. There are so many different ways that the hand can fold and angle, and the same with the feet. And every time this does change, it changes the way the fingers are shaped and the way light falls on the knuckles and the creases and the lines and the folds of the hand. So just make sure you're continually practicing. It's the only way you can get good at it. I remember maybe like 5 or 6 years ago, I was really struggling with drawing hands and feet, and the only way I got better was by practicing and making sure that I was looking at my reference pictures and not drawing what I thought I was seeing. And just here you can see me building up like the knuckles and the side of the hand and the different lines and the shadows that were falling on my reference picture. Sometimes when drawing like sometimes when drawing fingers or like the back of a hand, I'll shade the whole thing first and then I'll reduce it, so bring it back by erasing parts of that shading to show highlights in like knuckles and fingernails and those kind of parts of the hand. And from here, the rest of my drawing and shading with this piece is very similar to what I've described with doing the features of the face and building them up with layers and layers and making sure I'm smoothing. So the rest of the drawing is just going to show me finishing off this piece, but I will touch on a few more tips and tricks that I have that you can use to approach your drawings. So the first of my extra tips and tricks is that you should continually be practicing if you want to improve on your drawing. The only way you can get better at your skill or your practice is to continually make sure you're working at it and being critical of your own skill to make sure that you're reflecting on what you can improve and what works really well and celebrating that, but then assessing what you can do a little bit better next time, making sure that every drawing you work on is kind of a learning lesson and that can help you build your skill. My second tip is if you are struggling on getting everything correctly proportioned or in scale with your drawing, so say you're drawing a portrait, or it can be something as simple as like a flower or trees or a landscape, I suggest maybe flipping your reference picture and your paper upside down. This can help you just assess what basic shapes build up the image that you're trying to create within your drawing, and it can just help you make sure that everything you're sketching out is in proportion and correctly aligned within the page as you're going along. Thirdly, my tip and trick here is to make sure that you're taking breaks. I know that when drawing, if I'm falling into silly mistakes or pitfalls that I have within my own practice and lazy kind of methods that I have within my drawing, I make sure that I take a break and avoid getting frustrated with myself. This just means that I can come back to the drawing with a fresh pair of eyes and a new perspective, and I can approach parts of the drawing that I'm working on with a clear mind. And lastly, my final tip is to make sure you find that fine balance between continual practice and development and having fun with it. I don't see a point in making art if all you're doing is getting frustrated with yourself because it's not looking a certain way. Just enjoy the process and make sure that you're keeping in mind that everything you do is a learning process and you can only get better the more you work at it. So have fun with it. It's all a learning curve, really. And just to quickly wrap up me speaking in this video because I'm getting tired of my own voice. Thank you so much for joining me along this process. I've used Premiere Pro and I struggle every time, but I feel really grateful for this opportunity to be able to share my skill with you. If you have any further questions, please don't hesitate to ask. I'm always happy to help. But other than that, thank you for being here. Catch you later.